Hello guys, we all need to win this war. We must defeat and demilitarize Russia because this is the only working peace plan and the only way to deliver justice and restore moral clarity, not just the international law. And quite often, good people, friends of Ukraine, ask me, what is that one thing that you need most to win this war? And as an ordinary Ukrainian, I can say a lot about different kinds of weapons, political decisions, sanctions, but number one thing is unity. Unity here in Ukraine and unity among our friends and supporters. Unity was the very first emotion that made me smile at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. It was literally palpable on the streets, in the conversations, in the decisions that people made. And unity is the core of our community, of this channel. And I'm forever grateful that you chose to be friends of Ukraine despite the fact it's not easy. It's not easy to know the truth, but unity is something that Putin cannot break with missiles or various operations, and this is definitely something they don't have in Russia and even among their predator partners. That's why today, on this very emotional evening of the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, after 12 years of constant Russian attacks on Ukraine, I'm very happy and honored to have a conversation with 5 amazing friends of Ukraine, whom I'm sure all of you know and love. And I approached them with a very simple but a very important question for me personally, and I hope you will like to hear the answers of Operator Starsky, VladVexler, anderspuck, our friend Jonathan Fink, and arturrehi. I asked them what is the most important conclusion that they made after 4 years of this full-scale war. It could be something personal, something national, something global, something emotional or strategic, and all of their answers are so meaningful and so precious to me personally, because we discussed a variety of things, beginning, with this test on resilience that all of us, including you, have successfully passed, and finishing with the fact that Russia is not fit to be an empire. It failed back in March 2022. And of course, about this moral clarity and how important it is not to let your enemy, aggressor, define your morals. And about the fact how beautifully we Ukrainians kick Russia's ass. So please watch these answers of the amazing friends of Ukraine who did a lot of very important things to make us stronger, who helped the Ukrainian army, who helped the decision makers to see the truth, and I'm sure who will come one beautiful day to Ukraine to celebrate our victory and the defeat of the Russian Federation.
4 years after the full-scale invasion, the most important conclusion, as I see it, is that Russia is just not strong enough to be running an empire. This war that is happening in Ukraine is clearly a war about restoring an empire or maintaining an empire. The idea that Russia and the Russians should dominate over other countries in what they like to call the sphere of influence, that is running into so big trouble in Ukraine right now that eventually it is going to lead to Russia having to give up this idea. And I think it just is evident that if you are a country with 140 million people, you cannot, in the 21st century, have an empire where you dominate over 40 million people in another country. It takes a lot more than that. So I think this actually was visible already a few weeks after the full-scale invasion from the beginning or mid-March of 2022, it was evident that Russia was not going to succeed with a quick war where they were going to take the political control of Ukraine and achieve their war aims very quickly, and that instead this was going to end up in a kind of quagmire, which is exactly where we are now. And they can steal some territory in eastern Ukraine. They can do things like that. But that was not the purpose of the war. The goal of the war was to reestablish the empire. And doing that by taking the political control of Ukraine, and after that also other countries, this idea of broadening the empire and restoring past greatness. And they're not doing that by demonstrating that they are unable to do that over their neighboring states. So I think that is the big perspective here. That is the biggest conclusion. What we're witnessing is the death of the idea of a Russian empire. The bad news is that this can take many decades. I think the British Empire, it took a long, long time for that to disintegrate. And unfortunately, looking at things in the long perspective can sometimes give a clear idea of what is a trajectory here. But unfortunately, it can also lead to the misunderstanding that these things are about to happen really soon. And I think there is still a lot that needs to happen before the Russians realize that the days of the empire are gone. But that is the trajectory. And Putin wanted to restore the empire, but he's really going to do the exact opposite. He is going to be the ruler of Russia that disintegrated the Russian Empire.
Hello Anna, hello beautiful people. On the other side of the screen, Captain Starsky joins the chat. It's a big privilege to be on this channel. And today, unfortunately, we are facing the full 4th year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and also to us Ukrainians, that's 12th full year of Russia's hybrid war against us, which is absolutely insane, and so many years spent in the fight, 10 years of my life. But at the same time, to me, it's a proof that we have passed the test for resilience. A lot of people in Europe did, Ukrainians did, a lot of people in the United States, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Japan, and many, many other countries have passed this test. Of course, let's be honest, not everyone did, alright, because someone decided to just wear a red hat and pretend that it's not their business, or even side with the Russian terrorists, it's their choice. But today, in 2026, we can still see that the whole world is standing for the right cause. They're standing with Ukraine, and basically nobody wants to help or support Russia, even though there are people spreading their narratives. There's a lot of them, but at the same time, they are not supporting Russia. They're just earning money. And that's a big difference between us and them, and that's another proof that we will win, because we are able to fight for the right things, and that is why we are strong. One thing I would like to say is big thanks to everyone who keeps standing with Ukraine, fighting for Ukraine, and supporting Ukraine. Big thanks to everyone who helped with the fundraiser for my brigade, for that truck. It's already been delivered to the guys fighting in Pokrovsk. Big thanks for that. That's very important to me, and I will never forget this. To all Ukrainian defenders, all Ukrainian supporters, you are the people who inspire and motivate me every single day. Thank you so much.
Hi, Anna and Anna's community. I think that the lesson I want to share, and it might not be the most important one, it might not be one of the 10 most important ones, but it's important, is that you don't let the aggressor define your moral categories if you are the victim. After an aggression has been taking place for a long time, there is a tendency for us not just to get exhausted with it, but for us to get epistemically exhausted and to get morally confused. And one of the things aggressors regularly want to do is make the victim ask if the aggression might not in fact be their fault, to take responsibility for the aggressor's aggression, even though you're in fact an innocent victim. And we've seen this in the Putin freeze of the last few weeks, his attempt to terrorize Ukrainians by cutting off their heating. What Putin was intending there is for Ukrainians to start arguing with themselves, to start debating why the local authorities have not been able to keep the heating on. And might it not be the case that now, by year 5 of the war, the questions that need to be asked are questions that Ukrainians need to ask of themselves? Because after all, it's now year 5 of the Kremlin aggression, and surely it must now be taken as a kind of natural disaster. You can't blame it any more than you can blame a hurricane, and so you begin blaming yourself. That's a very important process of moral inversion that aggressors look for and structurally benefit from after their aggression persists for a very long time. And what's very important about this lesson is that it's not just a lesson about Russia's brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It's a lesson about all unaccountable power and domestic dictatorship, as well as aggression between countries. So Hannah Arendt said that one of the things that totalitarian regimes do is decenter your capacity to judge what's up and what's down and what's black and what's white. And you end up either not having a clear sense of what's going on, or even blaming the victim for the aggression that has been perpetuated against them. US Americans have recently seen this in the context of ICE marauding American streets, with the American government blaming the victims instead of the aggressors and the perpetrators. So there's this very big sense in which all kinds of aggression tends to corrupt our moral categories, and we begin to think, or we risk beginning to think, on the terms the aggressor wants us to think on. And the lesson is, don't do that. Lots of love to everybody.
Hello my friends, my name is Arturrehi. After 4 years of covering the war in Ukraine, I would summarize it by saying, you gotta stand up to bullies. In life, on the streets, in the school, in the workplace, but with countries and diplomacy, the biggest bully in the world is Russia. Biggest terrorist state run and sponsored by terrorism, and we see that they react and respond, and they honor only brute force. They have a language that they speak, and it's a language of force and violence. So if you want to make Russia listen to you or do what you want them to do, you gotta kick their arse first. This is what the Ukrainians are showing us. This is how we remember the Soviet Union and the diplomacy with them. And the Western weak, soft diplomacy has failed. Brute force with them works perfectly. So you want to make Russia obey your country's borders, have a strong army. You want to make them obey your maritime borders on the seas, have a strong navy. You want to make them obey your diplomatic ties and agreements. If they cross any lines, kick their arse. That's what I believe in. That's how we understand it here in Estonia. And I'm so glad to see that that's how Ukrainians are doing it. We have a lot to learn from the Ukrainians, and I hope we do.
I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked to say a couple of words to Anna's audience, her audience who are fiercely supportive of Ukraine and incredibly loyal to her. And of course, the fantastic content that she produces. This is on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We're entering the 5th year of what many thought was an impossibility in the 21st century, an imperialist genocidal war. Anna's asked me to say a couple of words about what specifically I've learned in covering the war over these last 4 years, and the 1,000-odd interviews that I have been able to conduct to try and shed light on Ukraine's struggle and the incredible characteristics of the Ukrainian people that have allowed them to survive. Well, the one thing I have to say here is the biggest learning for me is to discover Ukraine itself, to discover there is such a place as Ukraine that is willing to sacrifice everything to preserve freedom, to preserve identity, preserve their values, to preserve ultimately their dignity in the face of an imperialist aggressor. To discover there's such a people as Ukrainians who treasure that freedom, treasure the ability to be able to define their futures, to live in hope, to look beyond the horizon, beyond the horrors that are happening now, and imagine a future where they can exercise their will, their agency, their freedom to create a better world, a more comfortable world, one which they can define and control. That's the biggest revelation for me. But also, there are other, I think, incredibly important learnings here. And one of those, of course, is to discover that not only are Ukrainians willing to die for this thing called democracy, something that they do not have, I would say, the same level of cynicism that we have anymore. They believe this is real. They believe that democracy is something you need to strive for and that it can make a significant difference to people's lives, not just their material lives, but also their quality of life, their freedoms, and so on. Learning this is an absolute revelation, but also the understanding they have of why rule of law is important. Ukraine is unique, I think, in that it has been part of an imperial project, that is, the Russian imperial project. It has been subjected to extraordinary assault, invasion, and control over years, centuries even, attempts to erase its identity, its language, and the very core values that we now see and associate with it. The fact that it has survived centuries of Russian imperialism and indeed the Soviet project itself, the Soviet Union, perhaps one of the most parasitical, divisive, and punitive forms of imperialism or autocracy that has ever existed, one that stifles not just freedom, but also creativity and innovation. The fact that all these things survived in Ukraine, this culture of seeking solutions to problems, this culture of seeking to have responsibility, personal responsibility to solve problems and not just defer everything to government or to external agents or to seek to blame others for your problems. It's remarkable that this has survived. What this has also taught me is that rule of law is not just central to all of this, but that rule of law is not just something that exists in, say, a constitution or a set of books or is written down somewhere else for somebody else to worry about. It's not something written by external forces which control your life. No, the law has to be something living in every person. They have to be constantly thinking about those laws that relate to them, their family, their society, their communities. They have to be in a constant dialogue, even an argument about whether those laws are just and moral, not just there to be obeyed. And I think that is what happens in Ukraine. There is a living process of challenging the law, trying to ensure that the law is not subverted, perverted even by the rich, the powerful, the entitled.
This is how real friendship and real unity feels. We have different opinions, we have different experiences, but we all stand for the truth and we all support the only working peace plan to defeat and demilitarize Russia. And as friends and family, I want to ask you this very same question. What is the main conclusion that you personally made after 4 years of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine and 4 years of our resilience, bravery, and unity? Let me know in comments below. Remember to share this video to inspire others and to remind them that we need to defeat Russia. And subscribe, share, and once again, united we stand. Slava Ukraini!